idea. All right, I'm going to start the recording now.
I did.
Oh, you already started it.
Yes.
Wow, you're brilliant.
So,
All right.
Michelle, this morning, we're finally going to do the light and fluffy, and you're going to give us some closure to all this conversation, right? Undone doesn't last forever. You're going to tell us how we get done with our undone, right?
Oh, I wish it was that simple. I mean, it is going to be more light and fluffy than last week because for those of us, or for those of you who joined us last week on Blab Conversation number 4, the hot topics, we talked about, well, it was titled When Prayer Doesn't Work. So basically, when prayer doesn't quite go according to plan, what do you do then? And boy, that was an intense conversation. So today we're dialing it back a couple of notches and making it less philosophical and far more practical, which I hope will be helpful. But that said, that doesn't mean that your stories are going to all of a sudden resolve within the next 24, 48 hours. So anyway, today we're talking about practical ways to find relief in your unresolved story. So if you're in the middle of a situation that has been dragging on and on, whether it's a physical, like a chronic illness, a physical pain, or a family member who, how should I say, just can't get their act together, or maybe there's just a person in your life that's causing ongoing just difficulty or struggle, or maybe it's you've been unemployed for a long time, or we could go on and on. The scenarios are nearly endless. What do you do in that place when your story is unresolved to find peace? Because the problem is it seems like it's going to drag on forever and ever, and you can end up very, very miserable in the process. So how can we find some relief right here, even when our circumstances don't change? Have you been in that kind of long-term, challenging, hard circumstance, Sherry?
The one that comes to my mind is my back injury 15 years ago. And just, I was so convinced I was going to wake up each morning. I woke up thinking I was going to be all better. And when I prolonged my own misery by having some false beliefs about it. So I am looking forward to what you have to share with us today.
Well, and again, as those who are listening in, this is our weekly Undone Life Together conversation. We started this 3.5 weeks ago. It's a 5-week conversation about the unexpected life, and we have about 1,000 people that are going through this journey together, reading the book. But really, it's not so much about the book I wrote. It's more about how we can all kind of link arms and join together in our individual, very unique undone stories, but we're alike in the fact that all of us are living in a life that hasn't turned out quite like we thought. And so how do we make peace with it? And ironically enough, the subtitle of my book is A Story of Making Peace with an Unexpected Life, which is very much what today's topic is about. The book was very much memoir narrative, so it was more of a storytelling kind of device. But today we're going to just break it down very practical. And I'm just going to give you guys the strategies that I've used to find some measure of relief, even in the midst of a very unresolved story. And mine remains unresolved, and I have no false notions about the fact that it will be resolved at any point in time in the near future. So we got to figure out how to find relief here. You and I had an interesting conversation. Let's see. I think it was Monday over text, talking about this whole idea of comfort, because when we're in a place that's unresolved, whether it be physical, emotional, spiritual angst, we're looking for relief, some kind of comfort, right?
Definitely.
And so we're trying to find comfort, but before we can figure out what comfort is, I think we have to understand what it is we're looking for. And so, being that I'm a word person, I immediately went to look at the definition of comfort, which is so geeky, but I couldn't help myself.
I love it.
Because I had this kind of nagging feeling that perhaps we're misunderstanding comfort. And when I think of comfort, I think of, for example, when I was in the hospital, the nurse would come in and she goes, well, let me go talk to the doctor and see if I can get you something to make you more comfortable. And what she meant by that, she was going to get me some kind of pain medication to alleviate my pain or to minimize my pain. So comfort in that sense was bringing some kind of ease. Or when you come home from a long day at work and you're dressed in a suit, you tell your spouse or your friend, I'm going to go change into something more comfortable.
Yoga pants.
Yoga pants, of course. And so in that idea, again, the idea of comfort is to bring some kind of ease relieve some kind of pain or discomfort. So I looked it up, and sure enough, we've kind of changed the definition of comfort in recently, like fairly recently, within the last 300-400 years. So originally, the word comfort comes from a Latin word, which means, are you ready for this? It means to strengthen.
Ooh. Okay.
Which is like it totally different than what I thought. So when the nurse says,
I would think
when the nurse says, I'm going to go ahead, you go first.
I would almost think it would mean to coddle. And so that's almost the complete opposite of what, would come to my mind.
Exactly. And so, when the nurse brings me pain meds for comfort, she's not strengthening me. She's actually kind of numbing me and putting me to sleep so I don't feel my pain anymore. The idea of to strengthen means to kind of shore you up and buoy you up to endure the pain, not to not feel it anymore. So it's a whole different connotation. And you can see within that word comfort, the root word fort, comforter is the word. And as you mentioned on our text the other day, this idea of a fort is to kind of shore up your walls to strengthen you against the struggle. So the struggle doesn't go away. It just provides you with added resources or tools to make you stronger in the midst of struggle. So that's a very interesting thought. Now, the definition, when I looked it up, it said the sense of something producing physical ease did not come about with the whole idea of comfort until the mid 17th century.
Interesting.
So we're talking extremely recent.
Yeah.
That this idea of comfort being about physical ease has come about. So if we go back to the original language, then that's not what it means at all, which really helps us to understand a little bit more the biblical concept of comfort. So when God offers comfort, or when we offer comfort in a God sense, a faith sense, it's not so much that we are there to eliminate pain, but to shore up the person who is in pain to be triumphant in it. Or when God is comforting us, it's not so much physical ease that he needs to provide for us, or that he's promising to provide, but he's promising the strength and basically the fortress to be able to shore ourselves up in the middle of the struggle. So it completely, for me, revolutionized my expectations about the whole concept.
Well, and I'm thinking, as somebody trying to comfort someone else, if I think comfort is easing their pain and I don't succeed, then I feel like a failure and I want to leave, because I don't like people who make me feel like a failure. But if my role is to remind them, be Jesus with skin on for strength, and I love that word, being triumphant, it doesn't mean that everything has to suddenly become okay. And the thing I'm slowly learning, this concept that just being there can make somebody feel stronger. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to say anything. The platitudes we offer are, so often intended to make us feel better and numb our own nervousness and anxiety and give us ease. And I think that the cliches must have come from a misunderstanding of the word comfort.
I know, you have to wonder, right?
Yeah.
And even our sense, I wonder how much of our sense of disillusionment with God's supposed lack of provision of comfort is sourced in the fact that we don't really understand what comfort is.
That makes sense. Okay, so I know that you've got some practical tips for us. You've got 7 of them. So walk us through some of the practical things that you have for us.
So the first way to find some relief in the midst of your unresolved story is to invest in your spiritual health, which, it sounds almost cliche because we throw that around, but I don't think we really act upon that strategy or that approach. It ends up being that our spiritual health is the last thing that we often invest in, because it seems intangible, or it seems too ethereal. And so we avoid that. And yet it's really where we need to start. That needs to become a priority, because really, to understand our struggle, we have to have a bit of a spiritual perspective. That's really, a temporal perspective just makes us frustrated. The eternal perspective is what's really lends us wisdom and maturity. So invest in your spiritual health. Practically speaking, for me, this is committing to reading the Bible every day, which again sounds cliche, and yet it's become my anchor. Start small, but start somewhere. I'm not telling you to go out and memorize entire books of the Bible or to exegete Leviticus. I'm just saying to start somewhere. Pull out the Psalms. Read one psalm a day or a few verses from Psalms a day. Something to provide some spiritual input and invest in your spiritual life. It's so absolutely critical for you finding some relief in the midst of your unresolved story, because it lends encouragement, it lends strength, which is what we're talking about, finding that strength. It gives you perspective outside of your circumstance. Uh, it provides a sense of purpose in the middle of it. I mean, there's just really no way to over exaggerate the importance of investing in your spiritual health. So, reading my Bible every day is one practical thing. Again, start small. One thing that I do, oh, it's right here. When life is really crazy, or like when I was very sick, I didn't have even the strength to sit up at the table and read my Bible. So, I had produced these note cards that are called God's Word Over You, which is a collection. I mentioned these last week, I think, but I think it's 37 or 38 verses that talk about how God feels about us. So they're very uplifting, very encouraging. And it's just one verse on a page. Here, I can hold it up.
Oh, this is beautiful.
Just one verse on each card. And I ended up taking them with me to chemotherapy and radiation. Ironically enough, the nurses loved them so much that the nurses would hang them at the nurses' station to give them encouragement.
Wow.
You know, here they are dealing with cancer every single day. And that can be very discouraging. Plus, they had their own hard stories, frankly. And so the nurses would carry these around as their own source of encouragement, even nurses that weren't believers at all. And then, of course, I've handed these out. I carry them with me everywhere I go and hand them out to people who need just that daily reminder that God sees them and cares. So this is one resource that you could get actually on my website. But you could go ahead.
I just want to say what I love about that, and you already said you start small. We don't have to go out and memorize. If we're in a really difficult situation, pain or whatever. I mean, I grew up in a tradition where you memorized tons of scripture, and that's how you proved how spiritual you were. And so I knew that true deep spirituality had to do with memory. Well, chronic pain will wipe out your memory. Yes. And so then I felt like, oh my goodness, I'm now failing God again. And so thus he can't bless me. Oh, what a crazy way of thinking of things. And so permission to go small, to have something tangible, to have it written down so I can go, because we do this when we're studying, for an academic course. Why not do it for the most important area of our life? And I know I've talked with women who are like, well, I don't want things that are crutches. They're not crutches, they're tools. They're
tools and coping mechanisms and resources.
So I love that.
This was like a lifesaver for me to have something in my hand.
Exactly.
Something I could tangibly hold and read. I also call pain is a liar, whether it's emotional pain or physical pain. Pain is a liar. And pain is also very verbal. So pain speaks at us. When we're in pain, whether emotional, spiritual, physical pain, our mind almost works like a tape recorder. Listen how dated.
No, I know you're talking about.
It works as a recording that plays the same negative message over and over again. Things like, this will never end. There's no relief. There's no hope. God doesn't care. I'm all alone. Those messages play over and over and over again in our brain. So literally having these verses in my hand to read and counteract those messages was a true lifesaver for me. You certainly don't have to have it on this key ring. You could write it on an index card. I have index cards all over the place with verses on them that I have in my car, my bathroom. I carry them around in my back pocket sometimes so I can simply reach back to my back pocket and hold it. So again, invest in your spiritual health, Bible reading every day, small resources like scripture cards like these or like an index card. I also listen to sermons on podcasts or on audiobooks all the time. So when I couldn't move, I would just have those in my ears and listen to other perspectives, speaking powerful spiritual truth into my ears again and again. When I would go for walks, when I would finally get the strength to do that, I still do this, frankly. Every day I listen to podcast sermons, books, helpful, inspirational, spiritually based books and resources on podcasts or audio tapes. So those are just a few of the ways that you can invest in your spiritual health. But this really is the first and most important strategy. You need to start here. The second, which I just can almost feel people cringe before I say this, but the second strategy is to evaluate your expectations. I know. Don't you just hate that? Everything in me wants to resist it. our expectations are the roots of so many evils in our lives. Imagine marriage, the expectations you bring into your marriage relationship, the expectations you have about your children, the expectations you have about your colleagues at work, your employer, even people at church, leaders in church, leaders of our country. We can set some pretty unrealistic expectations, and then our pain is magnified, multiplied in our circumstances because, frankly, we haven't set the right expectation. For example, I've had to work very hard in the last year to reset my expectation about my speech
Mm.
because it is not, aside from a miracle, it is not possible for me to speak the same ever again. I'm missing 2/3 of my mouth, my tongue. It's not possible. So if every day I wake up hoping that I'm going to sound completely normal again, I'm going to be disappointed again and again and again. However, if I reestablish my expectation about myself, reestablish normal, I actually can see how I've progressed significantly over the last 12 months. Different perspective.
Yeah.
Also, my expectations about myself. I am still not physically 100%. I'm still not physically, emotionally 100% as far as recovering from last year. If I expect myself to be Superwoman, I'm going to fail myself every single day. So, what's the right expectation? And just evaluating my expectations of myself, of others, of my circumstances. Here's another example. If I expect my children to have it all figured out by the time that they graduate from high school,
I don't know what you're talking about.
and how many times, for those of us who are parents, get so disappointed because our child, who is only, let's say, 5, 16, 23, 24, doesn't have the same maturity that we do after, here I have 44 years. I still have a long ways to go, but we try to set expectations for them and don't understand why they don't get it like we do. Well, we have decades of experience and maturity and failure that have taught us something. So, all of that, evaluate our expectation. And where we have unrealistic expectations, be very practical about setting what would be realistic.
I like that. I've heard that expectations are premeditated resentment.
Oh, yeah.
And especially in a situation like we're discussing today, expectations then become premeditated resentment against God because he's not doing what we think he should, but he never promised to do the thing we somehow came up with this, this unrealistic expectation for. So,
which is so true, which kind of goes back to our spiritual health, because one thing I've discovered is my expectations of God in many cases, especially the seasons of my life when I was the most bitter, were based on inaccurate theology on my part. So a misinterpretation, a misunderstanding of Scripture.
Wow.
And that's where I needed to invest in my spiritual health by listening to sermons, listening to scholars, listening to theologians, reading different books and resources, and truly evaluating if I'm reading a scripture accurately. Because sometimes I read it and set up my expectation of how God should behave on very inaccurate theology. So the second, which I know there's resistance here to this, but the second practical way to find relief in your unresolved story is to mitigate your expectations.
Okay.
Be honest about what you're expecting of yourself, others, or circumstances, and God. And then, even sitting down and writing down what would be appropriate for me to expect.
Oh, good idea.
So for me personally, what is appropriate for me to expect of myself right now, right here, right now? I've had to do this even this week because in the last 2 weeks, I've had a 3-day speaking engagement, a trip to San Antonio to watch my son graduate from basic. I've had 3 children who have had birthdays. I've had book edits that were due twice.
Oh my God.
I've had this whole Undone Life Together project that's going on. I've recorded about 6 to 8 different 1-hour video interviews. And on top of that, I got sick about 6 days ago. And I'm doing taxes. Did I mention that?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. That's in the last 13 days.
Yeah.
I didn't get a blog post written last week or this week. And I felt very, very guilty about that. And then I went, hold on a second. Let's just think about what I've done in the last 13 days. What would be an appropriate expectation
I like that.
for myself, considering the last 13 days? And then I took some of that burden off my shoulders. So that's just some examples of how you can do that, is to sit and write down what you're expecting of yourself, give it some voice, and then evaluate it and write down a more appropriate expectation for yourself, others, or circumstances, or God. All right. Third practical way to find relief in an unresolved story is to focus on what you can control. What do we typically do, however?
We hyper focus on what we can't control.
Of course, right? We focus on, for example, like what I do, with the whole cancer scenario, I would focus on trying to cure my own cancer. Well, I mean, that's somewhat playing God on one hand, and it's a huge task that I can't possibly control. I mean, I can be healthy and all of that, but I can't control the cellular function of my body 100%. That's beyond my capacity. But what can I control? I can focus on my attitude. I can control the way I approach my circumstances. I control how I spend my time. I can control my commitment to doing things that I enjoy in spite of difficult circumstances. I mean, Dawn in the sidebar just said, "Oh, we're back to the issue of control." Yes, Dawn, we're back to the issue of
control. She went there. She did.
I know. Sorry about that. So focus on what you can control versus what you can. And again, I highly recommend that you grab a journal or a piece of paper or something to actually write this down. And what I do is I make 2 columns: what I can control, what I can't control.
So smart.
Really write it down. What can I not control? Well, I can't control the number of my days. I can't control my adult children's choices and behaviors.
You sure?
I can't even.
You sure about that?
Oh boy, I've tried. I've exhausted myself and frustrated them trying.
Okay.
I can't control their choices, their behavior. I can't control unexpected calamities or catastrophes like the weather, or what my son's doing in basic. Well, he's done with basic, but in the Air Force, hundreds of miles away. I can't control my husband. How many times have I tried to do that? He's his own person. I can't control God, for crying out loud, even though I tried to do that as well. So those are things I can't control. What can I control? My attitude, the information that I input into my mind and my heart. I can control how I spend my time. I can control the relationships that I spend the most time with. What are some things that you can control, Sherry, that have brought you some measure of relief in your unresolved story?
One thing just hit me this week, actually. I realized that I have spent my life trying to change other people's values so that they will treat me the way I want them to. And it just occurred to me yesterday, I don't need to change anything about them. I just need to tell them what I want. So, for example, I used to try to persuade my husband that it was wrong to interrupt people, that it is philosophically, morally, ethically wrong. It is a bad relationship thing to do. It occurred to me just yesterday, all I need to do is say, please don't interrupt me. Please let me finish. I don't need to change his belief system. I don't need to make this big a deal about it. And I mean, it was a whole lot less work. Hang on, I'm not done. He's like, he stopped interrupting. I'm like, well, that was easy. Where's my easy button when I need it? So I think sometimes, go to all this effort. And of course, what I just described is the difference between manipulation and boundaries. Manipulation was me trying to change him. Boundary was, this is my need right now. Now, of course, that's very risky. He might choose to say, I don't care. I'm going to interrupt you because that's what I want to do. And then that's a whole different issue. But I'm understanding boundaries is me doing what I can do. And thus it's what I can control rather than trying to control somebody else, which is what's going on in their mind and heart and their habits and their belief systems.
I can't even tell you how many, just like you said, how many times I've tried to convince somebody of a way of behaving or a way of thinking or whatever. I mean, you can certainly express your perspective, but it's an entirely different thing when you try to strong arm somebody into getting something that they're either not ready to get or don't have any desire to understand or whatever. Can you imagine how this would help our political conversations right now? Not that I had to bring that up, right? But just imagine how.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's all philosophical. It's all there trying to change rather than, bringing forth actual issues that we actually can do something about. You're right. I mean, that really is the difference, that they're trying to do things they can't control. versus what they actually can control.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. So far we've talked about 3 practical ways to find relief in your unresolved story. First, invest in your spiritual health. Second, evaluate your expectations. Third, focus on what you can control versus what you can't control. And then 4, commit to smart self-care. And I say smart self-care because there are times that we call, sitting in front of Netflix for 12 hours a smart self-care. That's not self-care. That's just numbing yourself. That's just as bad as, taking narcotics all day long just to numb your emotional pain or whatever. It's an addiction like anything else. So smart self-care. And when I say self-care, I also want to caution you against making this another list of to-dos or another thing to feel guilty about. This is the fun part this is the light and fluffy part of today's conversation. This should be fun for us. Basically, I'm giving you permission to take care of yourself. When you're in the middle of an acute stage of your unresolved story. So an acute stage of your unresolved story, that's maybe when your child is spiraling out of control and there's very little you can do to stop it. This may be when you're in the middle of treatment for a medical condition. This may be as your marriage is really on the rocks and you're not sure it's going to survive, or you're in a financial crisis or whatever. So when you're in that acute stage, we can spend so much time worrying and trying to control and trying to manipulate and trying to fix that we completely neglect just being kind to our hearts and our minds and our bodies. And this is so critical to helping us find relief. And so here's some questions to ask yourself when it comes to this idea of smart self-care. How much sleep do you need and how much are you getting? I'm a big believer in the power of sleep. I used to think that I needed to sleep less to do more. I believe you need to sleep more to do more. So how much sleep do you honestly need, and what can you do to make that happen? I also believe in establishing a very solid sleep routine, whatever that is. I go to bed at the same time every day, get up at the same time every day, and adjust it according to what you need. I am someone, I've learned I need a solid 8 to 9 hours of sleep every single day. Just do.
Good for you.
I know that I need it. That means I make some compromises in other areas to get that sleep. One of those things is I rarely ever watch TV at night. I eat dinner and clean up the kitchen, send the kids to bed. I almost immediately crawl into bed with a book, and my lights are out by 9 or 9:30 every night. Some nights as early as 8:30. I just know that I need to sleep. So how much sleep do you need, and how much sleep am I getting? And then make some adjustments to make sure you're getting it. Another question about self-care: what activities bring you joy or happiness? Simple things. It could be a pedicure, a massage, reading a book, taking a nap. There's nothing wrong with taking a nap. It could be scrapbooking or playing with photography or coloring or some kind of hobby or fishing or going for a hike or music or poetry, or just make a list. Again, you can take that same piece of paper we've been working on and make a list of things you enjoy. They don't have to cost money. They don't have to take significant time. But I would highly suggest that you allot at least 15 minutes a day to do one thing that you enjoy. At least 15 minutes a day. I have a good friend who's a counselor who a long time ago told me, call it like a mini vacation. Just like a short vacation every single day. And give yourself permission to do something you enjoy every single day. Also, another question about self-care: how's your diet? You knew I was going to bring that up. But I have learned I'm very impacted by caffeine. Actually can make my anxiety hit the roof. So if I'm already in a highly anxious place, limit my caffeine and sugar. Both of those things can cause anxiety to get even more out of control. And then one other question about self-care is, two others actually. One, get outside. I'm a huge believer in just getting fresh air and sunshine on your skin for helping bring some emotional, physical relief to your circumstance. So if you can get outside, if you can't get outside for some reason, have somebody push your bed next to a window where the sun can come in and you can look outside, or open up a window, but get outside. And then finally, have you given yourself some healthy space for your emotions? Have you given yourself some healthy space to basically be present to your emotions and process your emotions. If we are always running so fast, so hard, and don't give our emotions space, you will not find relief. Our emotions demand to be dealt with, and they're worthy of being dealt with, but we have to give space to them. And that may look like giving yourself a half an hour to sit down with your journal and just write down all the ugly emotions, anger and fear and worry and sadness and grief and devastation and all of that, and write it down, give voice to it. If you have a safe person to process that with, a friend or a family member, uh, ask them, can I just process some things with you? You don't need to say anything. You don't need to fix it or resolve it. I just need to say a couple things out loud. Do you have 15 minutes or a half an hour that I can just process this with you? If you don't have a friend or family member, or even if you do, I highly recommend a trained counselor. I've been very connected with my counselor over the last 5 years as I've gone through so much intense, unresolved areas of my story. It was extremely helpful for bringing relief, practical relief to where I was. So again, this fourth strategy is to commit to smart self-care. And you can do that through sleep, doing something you love for 15 minutes every day, watching your diet, getting outside, and giving space for the processing and acknowledgement of your emotions.
I see a strong connection between that last one, giving yourself space to process your emotions, and investing in your spiritual health. And I think that's what you have done with the Undone Life Together group, and that your book does. Because one of the things, I'm kind of in a grief journey right now, having lost my mom 4 months ago. And so I am reading everything I can on grief, everything I can on loss. And for me, it's a form of self-care. It's spiritual health. But in reading what other people have gone through and how they've processed their emotions, and, certainly in Undone, you have this beautiful balance between honoring our emotional experience, but not wanting anybody to stay stuck in it so that they continue to be miserable. And so there's a real crossover between those two, especially, finding whether it's a good speaker so that there's the audio, or it's a good book. And then that could be taken, the journaling or the thinking that comes from that could be taken to a counseling session or a spiritual mentor or a good friend for conversation. So there's some crossover I'm seeing going on here.
Absolutely. And I think you make a good point. When we emotion or that relief, we kind of get stuck in that place most often when we don't give intentional space to process it. Now, it doesn't mean that we aren't talking about it constantly. I think of people, or even myself, when I've been stuck in a place of emotion, I may be dumping like verbal vomit, right, all the time about the grief or the sadness. But the reason I keep doing this verbal vomit about it, sorry for the gross metaphor, but is because I haven't given space to intentionally process it in a healthy way. And so because emotions demand to be addressed and they are worthy of being addressed, it keeps coming out in kind of blurts and more inappropriate ways because we haven't honored those emotions in appropriate ways. So
very true.
So commit to smart self-care. The fifth practical way to find relief in your unresolved story is to limit negative input and maximize positive input. Limit negative input, maximize positive input. Now, this seems almost automatic, but boy, we are deluged with negative input every single day. And the worst culprit at times is ourselves. We are our own worst enemy when it comes to negative input, because we can, but without even realizing it, we can repeat negative messages again and again and again and again, both externally and internally. One of my negative messages I go back to all the time is, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? That's not helpful at all. It accomplishes nothing other than taking me back steps, right? So limit your negative input. That includes the friends that you choose to spend the most time with. We can't cut out every person in our life that's negative, but we can be very wise about how and when we spend time with those negative people. I have my circle of tight relationship, my circle of deep relationship has shrunk significantly in the last year. And that's been very intentional on my part.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain people, I love them so much, but I have to be wise about the fact, am I in a place where I'm healthy enough to deal with negative input on a long term, like in a long conversation right now, without it being very detrimental to both
Mm-hmm.
of us. And so being very aware of my own state and aware of those relationships is so important. Again, I've mentioned sermons, books, music. I'm very careful about listening, even television, all of that. I'm very careful about what I choose to watch and listen to, especially when I'm at a place of acute struggle. Watching depressing movies is not a good idea,
Yeah.
right? Watching, uh, for example, when I was in treatment, I didn't watch movies where the person had cancer and died. That sounds. I don't mean to be trite, but
No.
I mean, let's be smart. Let's not do that. Wasn't helpful.
Mm-mm.
So sometimes we're just naive about what we expose ourselves to, and then we wonder why we're depressed. So be smart. Be intentional about limiting negative input, maximizing positive input. That also includes your self-talk. Here's one challenge for all of us. If you're brave enough, and if you have a friend who is honest, like a friend who's not a yes man, but is truly honest with you, ask them for feedback on this particular topic. That are you someone, as far as your self-talk, are you someone who is verbalizing more negative input or verbalizing more positive input? And ask them to tell you the truth. And then, if you're brave, invite them to call you on it when they hear it. And that can help change. Honestly, many times it's just bad habits that can help change habits.
And very often unconscious habits that once they're pointed out, we can then notice them. But I've had friends that once I gave them permission, I was shocked. And then I was like, how long has this been going on? As long as we've known you. Okay. That explains a whole lot.
Yeah, exactly. Our mutual friend, Kathy Lip, has been good for me with this because I'm ashamed to say, I can be very, very hard on myself, negative about myself verbally. And she'll stop me and say, Michelle, nobody talks to my friend that way. Knock it off.
Now that's the kind of friend we need in our life.
Yeah, exactly. So very helpful. So limit negative input, maximize positive input. The sixth strategy for finding some relief in your unresolved story: daily remind yourself of what you still have, not all you've lost. Daily remind yourself of all you still have, not all you've lost. This is very much a gratitude practice. I just made it very much more specific because I think what we do is we end up categorizing or cataloging is the right word, all the things that we've lost over the last year. Again, personal example, I can talk about how I've lost my voice. I've lost my ability to sing. I've lost my taste. I've lost my appearance. I've lost my ability to tell my kids stories at bedtime because, at the end of the day, my voice hurts so bad, so hard. I can go on and on at what I still have and what I've gained as a result of this. And gosh, that list is so much longer. And so I have to be very disciplined on a daily basis to remind myself of what I still have versus what I've lost. And then go ahead, Sherry.
I was just going to say, I started working with a gratitude journal probably 10 years ago. I did the complaint-free challenge, which helped me realize how much I did complain, even when I thought I was being positive. And, there's that concept of the confirmation bias, that whatever it is that we believe, we're going to then start filtering the input, and we're going to prove that what our current belief is true. So if I believe that people hate me, I'm going to notice every time they bump into me, don't talk to me, don't invite me to things. And if I believe that people are generally good and kind and doing the best they can, I'm going to notice that about them. But I was astonished at the power of keeping track of the things that I had to be grateful for. And then the scientific research, which I know you're aware of, that our brains literally cannot process gratitude and any of the negative emotions at the same time. And so when we're doing that, we're blocking the negativity, which is great, but we also it can't even happen. It's not like we're just drowning it out. Like it's the negative is still happening and the positive is somehow shouting it out. It's just, it can't physically happen. So literally gratitude can change our minds. We have the power. And I believe, that's where the whole concept of the renewing of our minds, to me, that's a strong connection there.
Yeah, it changes. Well, as I'm sure you know too, when we talk positively, when we rehearse gratitude, it actually releases, endorphins
Mhm.
and all of that. So even the physicality of our body and everything responds very
Mhm.
differently, and so it truly makes you feel better. I tell public speakers all the time that before they get on stage, rather than saying "I'm so nervous,"
Oh yeah,
to say "I'm so excited."
yeah.
Because when you say I'm so excited, it actually causes different chemicals to
Mhm.
release in your brain versus saying I'm so nervous.
Mhm.
So what if we did that with our circumstances?
Mhm.
You know, it's not that we don't acknowledge pain, but rather than constantly saying I'm so worried, I'm so afraid, I'm so upset, I'm so
Mhm.
sad, what if we said, you know what, I'm so hopeful, or I'm learning so much,
Mhm.
or there's so much possibility taking place. Just changing how we talk about it actually changes
Mhm.
how our body physically responds to it, which
Absolutely.
truly does make us feel better. All right, so now we're on the seventh one here, and this one I have lived out over the last year and seen it work in a very powerful way. But the seventh practical way to find relief in your unresolved story is simply to give yourself away.
Mhm.
And this goes back to this idea of comfort, which is where we started, where in 2 Corinthians 1 3 through 7, Paul talks about how we're comforted, that we comfort others with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. So we comfort others with the comfort we have ourselves received from God. And interestingly enough, uh, the word for comfort there is paraklesis. That's the Greek word, paraklesis. I hope I'm saying it right. And here's the definition of what that word means: an exhortation, admonition, or encouragement for the purpose of strengthening and establishing the believer in his or her faith.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the exhortation, admonition, encouragement for the purpose of strengthening, which all goes back to this idea of comfort, is actually bestowing strength
Mhm.
and establishing the believer in his or her faith. And so ironic this year, not ironic, it's beautiful,
Mhm.
how in the hardest year of my life,
Mhm.
I have seen God use my pain to turn around and offer comfort to somebody else.
Mhm.
A comfort that I wouldn't have been able to give, an encouragement, exhortation, or strength I wouldn't have been able to give to anyone had I not gone through a need for that comfort and strength myself.
Mhm.
And that has been the most redeeming part of this
Mhm.
whole process for me,
Mhm.
is to see how what what could have been characterized by nothing but loss
Yeah.
has now been transformed into far more gain than the loss.
Mhm.
And I see that happen. I mean, even as you and I sit here and have this conversation,
Mhm.
as I'm talking through a mouth that doesn't work, uh, I am I am able to live out this seventh strategy where God is showing me
Mhm.
that in giving myself away, I feel so much better about my own unresolved story.
Mhm.
There's purpose here. There's an awareness of how God is working and using this. It's almost like I'm able to sit on a front row seat and seeing that what God is accomplishing and the glory that He is getting through something that could have been nothing but horrific.
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel so much relief in my unresolved story
Mhm.
with this whole process, with giving myself away.
Mhm.
I'm sure you probably have a similar situation,
You know,
Sherry, where,
I'm just thinking to myself, how counterintuitive this is, because our culture says that if you're in the midst of pain, we've talked about this, pop the pill, do whatever it takes to numb it, to make it go away, and take care of yourself and pull back and just say no. And what you're saying, with obviously, caveats and boundaries in a healthy way, but that the strategy of staying home and sitting in front of Netflix and waiting for the disaster to be over with before you start trying to be
mm-hmm,
of value. You're saying that the greatest value and the greatest contribution you're finding is actually in the midst of it, which,
exactly.
wow.
I know,
Wow.
mind blowing, right?
Uh-huh.
I heard from a woman the other day, actually, someone who's on the Undone Life Together group, but her mom's going through cancer treatment right now. But every day her mom goes in to get chemo or radiation, she finds somebody to pray with and encourage.
Wow.
And what happens in that process, not only does the other person, as a recipient of her prayer and encouragement, benefit from it, but the woman in the midst of her own battle
Mm-hmm.
finds so much reward for the fact that the calamity itself, the crisis itself, is actually creating opportunity for mutual encouragement that would not have been possible without the crisis. You know, that there are opportunities and connection points in the middle of that crisis that are created by the crisis itself. And so that means that it's very unique. It's like a unique opportunity that only comes back at this pinpoint in time. And if we can see how we can see the possibility there and give ourselves away there, not only is the other person benefited, but we are as well.
Sounds like the absolute opposite of victimization. And back to that word you used early on, being triumphant. I mean, because everything, what you're describing here is a triumph.
Exactly. And, you know, we're going to wrap this up now. And this has been such a good conversation. But the reality is we can't make our circumstances go away. I mean, there's a few things that we can resolve and certain things that we can do, but we cannot control and manipulate and manage all the undone areas of our life. It's beyond our control. So if we want to find peace and some measure of relief in the middle of it, first, invest in your spiritual health. It's absolutely essential. 2, evaluate your expectations and mitigate them where it's necessary. 3, focus on what you can control rather than all the things you can't. 4, commit to smart self-care. 5, limit negative input, maximize positive input. 6, daily remind yourself of what you still have, not all you've lost, and that can be as simple as a gratitude journal. And 7, give yourself away. Look for key ways that your unexpected story, your unresolved story, actually creates opportunity for ministry and connection or encouragement, rather than waiting for your unresolved story to resolve before you do it. Because I promise you, if you give yourself away right here, you will find gifts that you couldn't even imagine that were possible. And just to wrap up, I just wanted to wrap up with one verse, Psalm 119:76. And the psalmist says here, may your unfailing love be my comfort, according to your promise to your servant. And ultimately, that is our greatest comfort. And that word unfailing love right there comes from the Hebrew that is hesed, which is God's everlasting mercy, faithfulness, love, and kindness that will not end. And so that's my prayer for all of us in our unresolved story, that we would find that God's unfailing love is really the fuel behind us finding relief in the middle of our unresolved stories. So thank you all for joining us today for this Undone Life Together, conversation number 4, hot topic on finding practical relief in your unresolved story. We will be back here next week for our final Undone Life conversation, hot topic to be determined. So we'll see you next Wednesday, 10 a.m. Mountain Time, 12 noon Eastern Time for our final Undone Life conversation. Thank you, Sherry, for all your input. I love your wisdom.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for pouring yourself out into us.
Well, we will see you guys next week. Have a great day.
Sounds good.